Welcome to Literacy Home Learning. This is a literacy unit appropriate for children learning from home during this extended school closure. It is designed to provide learning opportunities for primary age children and will help to develop their abilities within the national curriculum. This is lesson number 9 in the series. Please listen along, pause the video when necessary, and listen out for the task appropriate for your age and ability. To be prepared for today's lesson, make sure you have something to write with and your home learning book. Follow along with the video and be sure to pause when you've been given a task to complete. You will know when to pause the video when you see the symbol in the bottom corner of the screen. Today's learning objective is to be able to change elements of an original story to create an alternate version. Time for your first quick task. With your home teacher, identify the main events in the story Tyrannosaurus Drip. To identify the key events, we will listen to the story Tyrannosaurus Drip by Julia Donaldson and David Roberts one more time. In a swamp beside a river, where the land was thick with veg, lived a herd of duck-billed dinosaurs who roamed the water's edge. And they hooted up with rivers, and they hooted up with reeds, and they hooted up with bellyfuls of juicy water weeds. Now across the rushy river, on a hill the other side, lived a mean Tyrannosaurus with his grim and grisly bride. And they shouted, up with hunting, and they shouted, up with war, and they shouted, up with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur. But the two Tyrannosauruses, so grisly, mean and grim, couldn't catch the duck-billed dinosaurs because they couldn't swim. And they muttered, down with water, and they muttered, down with wet, and they muttered, what a shame that bridges aren't invented yet. Now a little Compsognathus, but for short we'll call her Comp, found a duck-billed egg and stole it from a nest beside the swamp. And she swam with it, and ran with it, and murmured, clever me, and won't the baby Comps be thrilled with duck-billed egg 4? Tea! She dropped the egg in terror, and went running for her life, from the mean Tyrannosaurus and his grim and grisly wife. And the duck-billed egg went rolling, and at last it came to rest in, of all unlikely places, the Tyrannosaurus nest. Now the mother tea had great big jaws and great enormous legs, but her brain was rather little, and she couldn't count her eggs. And she sang, hatch out, my terrors, with your scaly little tails, and your spiky little toothies, and your scary little nails. Out hatched babies 1 and 2, as perfect as could be, but Mother T was horrified by baby number 3. And she grumbled, he looks weedy, and she grumbled, he looks weak, and she grumbled, what long arms, and look, his mouth is like a beak. He just needs feeding up, said Dad, and gave the babes some meat. The first 2 gulped and guzzled, but the third refused to eat. And he said, I'm really sorry. And he said, I simply can't. And he said, this meat looks horrible. I'd rather eat a plant. A plant? Yelled Mum in horror. And Dad said, get a grip. His sisters found a name for him, Tyrannosaurus Drip. And they shouted, up with hunting. And they shouted, up with war. And they shouted, up with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur. Poor Tyrannosaurus Drip tried hard to sing along, But the others yelled, "You silly Drip, you've got the words all wrong." For he hooted, "Down with hunting," and he hooted, "Down with war," and he hooted, "Down with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur." Drip's sisters soon grew big enough to hunt with Dad and Mum, but they turned on Drip and told him, "You're not fierce enough to come." And he cried, "They're gone without me." And he cried, "Alack a day." And he cried, "This doesn't feel like home. I'm going to run away." So he ran off to the river, where he saw a lovely sight, a herd of duck-billed dinosaurs, all hooting with delight. And they hooted, "Up with rivers," and they hooted, "Up with reeds," and they hooted, "Up with bellyfuls of juicy water weeds." As he stood there on the bank, a sudden urge took hold of him, and he jumped into the water and discovered he could swim. And the duckbills came to greet him by the rushy river's edge, and they hooted, "Nice to see you," and they hooted, "Have some veg." And Drip, who was delighted that they hadn't run away, ate bellyfuls of waterweed and played with them all day. Then he gazed into the river, and he asked them, "Who, oh who, is that creature in the water?" And they laughed and said, "It's you." That night the lightning crackled, and a storm blew down a tree, and it fell across the river, and the tees cried out, "Yippee!" And they shouted, "Up with hunting," and they shouted, "Up with war," and they shouted, "Up with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur." Drip's sisters stepped onto the bridge, but then began to frown, for there in front of them stood Drip, who yelled, "Look out, look down." And they looked into the water, and they each let out a yelp. And one cried, "Water monster," and the other one cried, "Help." Their mother scolded, "Nonsense," and she joined them on the tree. Then she looked into the water and exclaimed, "Good gracious me." The three of them stood trembling, and Dad said, "Get a grip. You're all as drippy as Tyrannosaurus Drip." He strolled onto the bridge and scoffed, "I bet there's nothing there." Then he looked into the water, and he jumped into the air. And how the duckbills hooted when he landed with a crash, and the tree bridge broke, and 4 Tyrannosauruses went splash. And spluttering and clinging to the branches of the tree, they went whooshing down a waterfall and all the way to sea. And the duckbills hooted happily. They hooted, "Hip, hip, hip. Hooray for the heroic one and only duck-billed Drip." Let's just recap that quick task again. With your home teacher, identify the main events in the story Tyrannosaurus Drip. Here are the main events we found. First, the story introduces the different characters and then introduces the different settings. The Compsognathus takes the egg and bumps into the T-Rex. The egg rolls into the T-Rex nest. The egg hatches and the T-Rexes are shocked. The T-Rexes mistreat the duck-billed dinosaur. He runs away and finds dinosaurs of his kind. A storm comes and knocks down a tree. The T-Rex try to cross the tree to get to the duck-billed dinosaurs. The trees break and the T-Rexes fall in the river. And the duck-billed dinosaurs have a happy ending. Time for your next quick task. With your home teacher, discuss what elements of the story you could change to make your own version without changing the theme of the story. So what could you change? We thought you could change the characters and the setting, as we've already planned new ones in our previous lessons. You could change how the egg goes missing. You could change the storm. You could change the tree falling down. And you could change how the character gets home. So what could happen in your new story? Maybe an earthquake could shake the ground and the egg could roll away. Or a flying dinosaur grabs the egg and drops it into the other dinosaur's hands. Or the baby dinosaur could run away but comes back after he has learnt a lesson. To plan your story, we'd like you to use a comic strip. Here's one we've created, but we have left some gaps. Maybe you could use this to inspire you and fill in the gaps. Also, underneath each picture, it's important you put a brief description of what is happening. Year 1 and 2, here's your main task. In your home learning book, use this comic strip and complete the missing boxes to create your plan for your story. Year 3 and 4, here's your main task. In your home learning book, use a comic strip to plan your story using the setting description and the characters from the previous lessons. Remember to use the changes from earlier to help plan your story. Your plan must be at least 8 boxes. And finally, Year 5 and 6, here's your main task. In your home learning book, use a comic strip to plan your story using the setting description and the characters from the previous lesson. Remember to use the changes from earlier to help you plan your story. Your plan must be at least 10 boxes long. So how have you done? Time to share your work with the class. Read your plan to your home teacher, but don't forget to check for spelling and punctuation mistakes first. Well done everybody. That's the end of lesson 9. Be sure to join us again in the next lesson.